Do we have a new beast from Baku? Timur Radjabov sends Maxime Vachier-Lagrave home in the semifinals at the 2019 FIDE World Cup in Khanty-Mansiysk. It was a great game full of many instructive moments and exciting action, so without any further ado, let's jump into what happened today from Siberia. We have these two guys facing off, as said, Timur Radjabov and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. And to start, we didn't have any surprises, an opening played by both of these guys many times. In fact, so much so that after this English d5 captures and then e3, when I looked up this position and admittedly spent too much time trying to figure out the opening, it seems that the expert playing this position as black more often than any of the world's elite is Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. So not necessarily something that should have caught him by surprise, at least not at the start. Knight takes c3, d takes c3, black declines the queen exchange very often in this line. And after the move e4, e6, this is where we already start to get some interesting stuff. Now, what was surprising in analyzing this opening is that nobody had played the move order that Timur chose here up until this game. Until this game, the move that had been played more often than not is bishop to e3. It's a natural developing move, right? You bring your bishop into the center off of the back rank. Of course, you prepare to develop the rest of your pieces, but most importantly, this bishop comes to e3 with one idea in mind, which is that by getting it off of the back rank, you're preparing your follow-up maneuver, which often starts right away with the move knight to d2. So what's White's goal in this line normally? Well, with the bishop on e3, as we said, rather than c1, now you're not blocking your own pieces. And by getting this sort of coordination, you're preparing for the kingside pawns to do their job and advance up the board, maybe for the potential of an attack. It makes a lot of sense. In a lot of the main games here, Wesley So has played this position as White versus Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Peter Svidler has played this position as White against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Of course, there are other top players, but Maxime has played this position more than any of them as Black. And in most of those games, we'll follow one, let's say after castles, queen to f3 coming out first is a very common thing before f4 advances. The queen comes to g3, and eventually we get this pawn maneuver. While White does eventually build up for some pressure, the extra time Black has here to rid himself of the light square bishop and eliminate White's light square bishop is one of the key factors and patterns that I noticed in looking at this opening, is that the approach previous to this game by Radjabov allows Black the time to get these pieces off the board. And without that light square bishop, maybe on a naturally menacing diagonal to anybody's king side, White's attack is always going to take a bit of a hit. It doesn't mean there isn't potential and that White's score isn't okay here, but it's not going to be nearly as dangerous as a position where you had the light square bishop. So hopefully that history, and again, you can click the link below to go read my blog on it, where I included a lot of those top games I'm talking about if you're really interested in some of the advanced theory of the line. But all of those games previous to this one had those maneuvers in common. The bishop comes to e3, followed by the knight coming to d2. Even in some games where White didn't choose the queen plan, but immediately advanced f4. All of those lines, while sound, they're a little bit slow and give Black this ability to eliminate the light square bishop. So what happened here? Timur Radjabov played bishop to d3, already a novelty. And again, I surprised myself by putting in the notes, did we really have a novelty on move 8 that legitimately offered a better approach than had been tried by tons of super GMs up until this point? I think we did. Because after bishop to d3, bishop to e7, again, the most natural developing move, we see White's point. After the move queen to e2, immediately preparing the idea of the advance to e5, just like you try to establish with the knight maneuver in f4 that I mentioned. Here, White is playing much more directly for this plan, and what you'll observe is that the bishop on c1, in many ways, in this game, was already developed right there on its starting square. After the move bishop to d7, White castles, and the intentions are going to be clear. White's pieces are set up perfectly for every single one of them to join the party over here on the king side. So with that in mind, I gave myself a question mark for giving one of my very good friends a question mark. MVL, of course, I'm sorry you're going home, buddy. But after the move castles, I gave it a full dubious marking, because when I looked at this game and analyzed it myself first with the theory and then back with the engine, there's just no way to deny that castles doesn't fully take into consideration how dangerous the potential attack is coming for white. Now, of course, it's a structure you've played before, but the move order is, while subtle, very, very different, right? The bishop on d3, already prepared to get attacked, changes the entire flow of this game. We're not going to have any of the positions where that bishop leaves the board. And so, yes, I felt that castles was a little risky, and the engine agreed too. The move recommended is h6, which from a human perspective, I'll say is very flexible. Again, it kind of puts the question on white, show me your cards before I commit, right? It also guards the g5 square, which we're going to see is critical to slowing down black's sort of launching pad for the attack. And it even keeps the option open, in theory, that you might castle long. Now, I think that there's no denying white is positionally better here, right? White has more space, a small lead in development, but this would be a completely different kind of game than what we saw, with black having the dynamic options that he wanted, maybe by choosing this line, options to play for a win as black. But after the move castles and white plays e5, it's not just that to the eye we suddenly appreciate the maneuver that Radjabov did, and again, you can look it up, never been played this directly, which is just kind of shocking. Not only is it easy to the human eye to understand that, but the engine evaluation, after I was done to go through it and check my analysis as well as the games, agrees that white is already clearly better here. e5 has a very direct threat, which is the move queen to e4, followed by battery town on h7, right? Can you say checkmate attack? Because it's about to happen. Bishop to c6 is a move that stops queen e4, so as much as you'd love to play a move like knight c6 to develop your pieces, put pressure on the pawn, after queen e4, things like g6 and then the queen inches her way to f4 was just one example line I gave to show how dangerous things like queen h6 followed by somebody coming to g5, maybe coming to f6, Bob might be your uncle on g7, and the in-laws are coming to dinner, right? Not a fun party. So this is not an option anymore, right, for black. Bishop to c6 is the only move. And after the move knight to g5, I was already just having a very difficult time from here on out in this game finding improvements for MVL. Not to say there aren't going to be some improvements I'm going to suggest that maybe black had, but they're almost subjective to the degree that it was the choice between losing in the way it was in the game or finding maybe the better potential to grovel for a chance at tie breaks, right, to get a draw, which of course would have been better in hindsight, but really hard to see where black could have improved. I'm going to give a lot of examples. So to start, instead of the move h6 that was played, what happens if black played g6? Well, buckle up. If you're not sitting down yet, you're going to want to for the rest of this video. Knight takes h7, followed by queen h5 check. There's no stopping bishop takes g6, because if you go to g7, I push you back and then finish the job. And attacking lines like this, where the queen maneuvers herself to open up the h6 square for the bishop, this is a very kind of typical attack with threats of queen g6 and all kinds of fun. So that's one variation to show why this position is already very dangerous. Moving the f-pawn allows it en passant and doesn't stop anything. So the only other move is a move like bishop takes g5. Now, having analyzed this with bishop takes g5, the best variations black is getting are lines where white decides to play bishop e7 and black can hopefully sacrifice the exchange. Playing an endgame where, especially when white is the only one who gets the d file, it's a two-result position for white and not fun. Maybe better for black than what happened in the game, but if that's the best you have, and I analyzed, my human eye said, no, engine, I don't want the material you want. I want to play for the attack. Let me keep the e5 pawn. And now, instead of even playing bishop to e7, I wanted to play bishop f4 with the very straightforward idea of queen g4, rook e3, and slide over, right? So the engine doesn't totally agree with me, which is normal. Maybe I didn't give it enough time and wants the material. But I think that this is exactly the kind of position Maxime didn't want to play. This is just not fun to see how you're dealing with things like queen g4 and a rook lift. So already, if that's not possible, then h6 seems logical. But here comes Vachier, right? Bishop h7 check. We're going to see why that king on h8 was misplaced here in just a minute. And the bishop comes back to c2, renewing the idea of the battery, right? So we already had the immediate threat of the battery when we played e5 to open e4, and black stopped it. Now we have the bishop coming back to renew the threat of the battery, right? So black plays c4 to stop it. By the way, probably the one mistake Radjabov made in this game, which he admitted apparently in the post-game press conference that I learned later, was that there may not have been any reason why bishop b1 could have been played right away with a double threat to get the battery. And here, black wouldn't even have c4. c4 would allow the move queen to c2, and you're just completely busted, right? Just to note, variations like this are going to completely fall apart to this sort of attack. So it's possible bishop b1 was even better And if black was forced to play g6 earlier, several moves you can analyze: knight h3, knight e4, even knight takes e6 according to the engine, but I wouldn't go for that. I would just play knight e4, play something like bishop f4, use either the d6 or f6 square, queen g4, sort of, etc., right? h4, h5. These sort of positions are very, very easy for white to play. So, possibly just an inact. It was hard for me to believe that bishop c2 wasn't best because I assumed Radjabov was still in preparation. But maybe in the end, it really was the fact that he was in preparation to this point, or to this degree, that he knew white was going to be very good in these lines. And kind of the human perspective is you want this option, right? It's also hard for human beings to go all the way to b1 so early in the game before move 15 and kind of permanently trap their rook. So you can understand that, and of course white's position is still very good regardless of bishop c2. But you could argue bishop b1 was even better. Anyway, c4 played by MVL, and here we go. The attack continues. Rook to e1, a very disciplined, patient move. Overprotects what is sort of the catalyst for your attack. Whenever you can lead the attack with positional means, you're always on the right track. What I mean by that is some players watching this video, raise your hand if you're guilty. Come on, you're guilty. You know it. You just wake up on that side of the bed and decide you're going for checkmate. It doesn't always work like that. When you have pawns leading the way, because a pawn here closes the board to a degree, it stops natural defensive pieces like a knight on f6 and always opens up the flare you're looking for to head that way. So you want to overprotect these sort of catalysts and make sure that the structure doesn't fall apart easily. By the way, any puzzle rushers, of course, can solve for themselves why taking g5 is poisoned. I guess I forgot to mention that. Hopefully you got that. So rook e1, and if the queen goes to d8, now of course you are threatening to win a piece. So the knight retreats. And after the move queen d5, black gets one threat in the game. Yay, right? One threat, threatening g2, right? Okay, too bad. That didn't work out. Knight f4 hits the queen moves, and here we get the move that maybe should have been played back on move 14, bishop to b1. So the queen c2 threat is now completely unstoppable and sort of forces Maxim's hand. But I will give him credit here, recognizing the writing on the wall. Did he know how early the writing was on the wall from this very interesting bishop d3 novelty, and that he shouldn't have castled, shouldn't have assumed it was going to be too similar to other games he played? I don't know, but clearly at this point I think he knew he was in trouble. He played bishop g5, so credit to him. He was still trying to defend dynamically, in that he didn't want to play things like g6 and just close the diagonal. Of course, here they might have 1.5 million problems anyway. Bishop g5 not only prepares to get rid of the knight, but also opens up the 7th rank square for the queen, which would have been key in some defensive lines that analyzed with the engine. But either way, knight takes e6 is played. I don't think this was a blunder by Maxim. I think that he didn't want to try to defend the position and buckle down. Again, any developing move, it's literally lights out. The queen to c2 coming can't be stopped, and from that perspective, I think that trying to force your opponent's hand, even at the cost of a pawn, is something you can justify. After takes and bishop takes g5, you have slowed down white's attack, especially because you've got a little bit of pressure here. Queen to d5. Again, remember, you can't take, because queen h5, bishop h7, and then we'll let puzzle rushers solve the rest. Queen to d5 hits g2. The move queen to g4 defends it. Note that f4 is also maybe interesting, but I think queen g4 is fine. Here's the first of several options where I said I wasn't really going to be able to improve on Maxim's play, which just shows the level of preparation and awesome chess that Radjabov played here in this game. But I think you could argue from a practical perspective, of the 3 opportunities Maxim has to try to get the queens off the board, this was the first one. Taking on g2, taking is going to be worse. There's several lines I looked at here. I think the most straightforward one was just actually to take and play bishop g6, where you then grab the d file and start doing rook lifts of different kinds, and black is in big trouble. But okay, maybe you're not made it as clearly as you were in the game. So that was the first option. He didn't take it. He played knight d7, and after bishop e4 takes e5, but queen h5 defends everything because you're hitting the queen and opening up the 5th rank, which renews the threat of bishop takes h6. You can't take on h6 because we'll have checkmate on h7. This is the second option where maybe black could have got the queens off the board instead of what he did. Actually, sorry, it was right here after queen h5 first. Right here, he could have once again played knight f3 check to open up the 5th rank and tried to get the queens off. This variation goes into a rook ending. Is this any more appetizing to play than the endgame we just saw with the bishop and the knight on the board? Maybe a little bit better, right? So if we were ranking them, the first one I showed probably the worst option that he could have got the queens off. This was the second option, but at best case scenario, he's sitting here groveling, right? Hoping to draw a rook ending. It's hard to go for that as black, right? But the third option is the one that occurs after the move in the game. Bishop takes h6, bishop takes e4, bishop f4 with check, and then we get the queen's trade offered on e5. And this one here, I'll be fully, I guess, brash in the sense that I really think Maxime should have traded queens here. And again, good friend, really sorry. Honestly, I feel like many people saw him as the favorite at this point. Obviously, Ding Liren is still in the field, so, really disappointing on a personal level, but a great game for Radjabov nonetheless. But I don't understand why Maxime didn't trade queens here. Black ends up with no chances to justify his opposite colored bishop position versus what white ends up getting in the game, right? We know that opposite colored bishop positions, whoever gets the initiative on their particular color complex will always control the tempo of the game. So combine that fact that white has a much more easier time dominating the dark squares than black would ever have on the light squares, with the fact that black's king is already much more open than white's. Meaning if the queens are on the board, who's going to have the better attack? Probably white, because black's king is open. And I just can't understand why Maxime didn't trade here. You have to know you're just worse at this point. Take the queens off. Both bishop d5 and bishop d3 are things I analyzed. I ended up kind of settling that I think bishop b3 and king f7 probably the most straightforward approach, where black is by no means out of the woods here at all. Black will be groveling once again, but it's an obscure bishop ending, right? There's got to be some potential to coordinate and guard the weak pawns. I don't know. It just feels like this was for sure the right approach, and to try to draw, get yourself to tie breaks and start again. But Maxime wasn't into it. He played bishop d5, keeping the queens on the board, and after the move rook e2, rook f5, queen e3, queen e8, trying to slide around to the light squares. Radjabov plays his last, in my opinion, very brilliant move of the game with the move f3. Just the simple human approach that says, no soup for the bishop here. Shake your finger. You will be eating granite for the rest of the game. And while I'm sitting here maneuvering my pieces on every dark square I control to get the one dark square that matters over here, the G spot. So this is just not really acceptable here for Maxime now that the queens are still on the board. And again, I'm coming back to wondering why he didn't take the chance when he had it. So the moves continue. White plays h4. Eventually comes back to the e5 square, but only once the last remaining piece gets involved. The rook lift over to g4. I did analyze that if there was one way to try to change the game, this may be your last chance, something like e5, to stop the plan that occurs in the game where the bishop wants that square. But a number of things for white would say that white is still clearly better here. The most straightforward idea is actually queen d2, followed by queen e1, and turn this pawn into a target. So the one way you would get away with e5 in games like this is if you already have the ability to get e4, right? If you can trade off the e for the f pawn and do it safely on the light squares, you've changed everything and improved your chances. But if you can't get that, I understand why Maxime didn't play it. Unfortunately, sitting tight was just that, though. Sitting tight does nothing but let white continue to improve and eventually get everybody involved over here, as I said, attacking the favorite square over here. And after rook h5, bishop d4 frees up a new piece for e5. Everybody's coming over here. This is not going to be fun for black. Rook g5, king g8, h5 threatening h6. So after the trade and queen e7, queen to g4, this is where the blunder happens. But as I pointed out, it's hard to call a move like this a blunder. Yes, it is a blunder of a full rook, forgetting that the pawn was pinned. But it's hard to call it a blunder when you can't suggest a better move. The threat is h6 and rook g5. How you stopping it, right? You're breaking open everything. I'll give some lines I looked at, right? If the king tries to run away, you go to g5, take g7, and Harry becomes a real wizard. Other moves we looked at, right? If they just sit tight just to show the line, you get the rook over, g7 is falling, the dark squares are opening up, the floodgates with it. Playing something like king h7 just allows queen g6 and then rinse and repeat. So there was really nothing to it. Rook f5 was played, and Maxime starts packing his bags as soon as queen takes f5 follows it up. So again, a heartbreaking one if you are a fan of the Frenchman with three names, but if you're a guy in Timur Radjabov's corner, this guy starts to just bring a lot of mixed feelings for chess players. I was talking with our staff today after the game, and he's just one of those guys where you find that throughout his career, being anointed even by the original beast from Baku, Garry Kasparov, back in the early 2000s, as maybe one of his potential successors, right? Timur Radjabov has always been seen as just a super talent of his generation. I remember being in Russia in 2002, watching him play in a tournament, thinking, wow, like this kid will be a world champion one day. But it never quite developed into being a true candidate. Will this be how that all changes? Right? It's hard to look at this game and not see a guy at the top of his chess right now. Obviously, just really impressing and turning a lot of heads here. So if this kind of level of preparation and pretty ruthless execution continues, look for Radjabov to be a force to be reckoned with in the finals, whether he's taking on Yu Yangyi or Ding Liren. Somebody from China is going to be playing the man from Azerbaijan. Hope you enjoyed this video. Give us a like, give us a comment, give me a subscribe, right? Share the videos if you've been appreciating these, and I'll see you around on Chess.com.